Okay, back to it. We were going into the liquid dryers and what we do during the oil change, if I'm not mistaken. Once you drain all the oil out of the system and you get all the oil changed, at the same time you're to change your liquid dryers, your oil filter, and any other filters associated with the system, which where you have demand cooling, that'll even have a dryer in it. So any dryer that's on the rack, you need to change it. Now you don't have to change it every single time you do an oil change. Typically it's just only once, but you can go back and check your oil. The color of it as you drain it the second and third time will tell you if your system is clean. However, whatever your customer has asked you to do, if they've only asked you to change them once, or they may tell you change it every single oil change. So I go back to what the customer specs are, and it'll tell you every oil change requires a dryer change. So we've got other dryers here. These would be your liquid dryers, typically, and your demand cooling shell usually has these as well. This would be another type of oil filter off of the separator. Come on, fingers. This is a Sporlan OF303T, I believe. And the T stands for what? Tap, tap. So you typically will see these off of the oil separator before they go either into the reservoir or not. So the tap obviously is to allow you to check the pressure, you know, if it's stopped up. Then you'll see these little jobbies. These are on ROF canisters. Never seen these? Oh, well, this rack has it, and we'll view it a little bit later, but a lot of the Walmarts had these, I believe. They had them both, didn't they? So it just depends. Again, when you go to do your preliminary walkthrough to look for what parts you need to order, this is something you're going to make note of. Hey, I need the OF filters. No, I need the ROF or the OF3 or OFE1. Well, this has got a rubber seal on it. Yeah. Set it out. Yeah, you don't want to leave it out. No. Yeah. Anymore, these suction filters, they don't come in the cans anymore. They wised up. They put them in plastic bags because they didn't need to buy the cans anymore. They figured, hey, this is cheaper, and it keeps it from getting wet. Because here's how they're just the same way that OFE. It's got the same. Well, I think they finally got too many of these that started getting wet. So that's something you want to keep an eye on when you make sure that the can's tight if you do get these. But where does it go? Well, it comes back through your separator. And if your compressor doesn't pick it up, because if you're bringing it back on the suction side and the oil's mixing with the gas, it's going to end up in the crank. So what catches that crap? The screen. Well, the pump won't get it because the screen will pick it up first, hopefully, that the screen don't have an oil or a crack in it or a split or the screen's tore off. But if it gets into that pump, you got problems.
Some of them at least have screens in them also.
Yes.
You catch it as it's taken on.
Well, your oil separator is what you're talking about. When the discharge of gas comes in the oil separator, some of those separators have got a screen that catches it, and typically that's when you know it's time to clean the oil separator, because that screen's so full that it's sending the oil right back out into the system. So you're going to find that out because the compressors start starving. All right? So those oil separators have got a screen. Typically they're, I don't know, if the oil separator's yay tall, usually they'll have a screen in them about yay long. And you've got to access that once you take the float out. You have to go up and access that inside of the barrel. A lot of guys don't know that, but you have to pull that screen out anytime, because it's not the float, guys. It's just because the oil is not getting to the float. So that screen has to be pulled out, and 9 times out of 10 on an R22 system, low temp especially, that thing is caked. It's so caked that there's no way the oil, I mean, it's just like somebody took that rubber spray. No, you use this stuff right here. This is good stuff.
You just pump some anti-compressors in.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, why not? But in a pinch on screens, and I'm going to tell you this, just a service tip. If you don't have any of this, go to the auto parts, or see if you buy it at the store. Just get some carburetor cleaner. It's the same thing. I mean, it's you got to have something in a hurry because the compressor's down. Do your best to clean it, but if you can get a can of carburetor cleaner, that'll work too. It's just something to blow all that crap out of the screen.
Contact cleaner, electric contact cleaner.
As long as it's dry when you put the screen back in, and no moisture. The reason I like the carburetor cleaner is because it evaporates almost immediately.
Smells better too.
Yeah, well, I don't know. This is pretty good stuff. So, so that's on your screens and whatnot, but definitely on your oil changes, you're going to change all your filters. And again, based upon the customer, whether you got to change them more than once or once is enough. Okay? Filters, any questions about your filters? I will tell you that whenever I do the filter change, I always use the RCWs, or a moisture removing filter. Now, that doesn't mean that this filter won't pick up moisture. It will. This is just a higher capacity. And the reason I do that is because if there's anything in the system when you're doing a conversion, get it now. Get it while you can. Because afterwards you can go back and put these in. These are just your standard core, and they're not as high a moisture removing content as these are. The HH dryers are for wax typically. So you're not dealing with wax on a conversion, you're dealing generally with moisture and contaminants. Because the R22, especially, I keep beating on this, but especially on 22 low temp, it's death. It beats those poor compressors to death because it's got such a, generally it has a very high compression ratio. So when you get that, that's when the compressors are breaking down. So, and then after you change all your oil and your filters, it's time to do that refractometer again. Now, Target's specs, they want to keep an eye on that every oil change. They want you to do it every single time. If you've got a customer that says 3 oil changes, period, you may not even be worried about it until after the 3rd oil change, because they still demand you to do 3 oil changes. It may not be worthy to have to check it until that 3rd oil change. So that's up to you if you just want to see what the levels are as you're changing it. That's what this is for. So every conversion I'll do, you'll have one of these. Have to. You have to know what you're...
Like you change the oil, you let it run through the system for...
Absolutely. The customer, most every single one of them require 24 hours run, no matter what. So this Target that we're getting ready to do, the very first day we're in there, Monday, boom, 1 oil change. We're going to wait till Wednesday, boom, we do another one, and the 3rd one we'll do on that Friday. So we've done all of our oil changes in 1 week. Whether it needed it or not, again, the customer specs are 3 oil changes minimum. So Kroger might only require 2. But they want to know what their levels are. So what'll happen there is if you're bidding the job and you're bidding it for only 2 oil changes, the third one will be an extra. It'll be on Kroger because they didn't require 3. So you got to know that in advance because you got to know how many gallons of oil to buy. And last time I checked, this stuff wasn't cheap. So that's why it's, I'm sorry? Yeah, well, what we're buying it for anyway. So when you're bidding the job, that's very important to know because of costs, obviously, and your materials. So, okay, so we got all of our oil changes figured out and what we're going to do. What are we doing next?
So on Targets and Costco's, you have to change all the rubber gaskets.
Again, I'm going to keep beating a dead horse here, guys. The whole thing about oil changes and gaskets and filters and anything is what the customer puts in their specs. So if my customer says, change all the ball valves, whether they're good or they're bad, change them. That makes life pretty simple for us estimators because I just count how many ball valves I got to change. I don't have to worry about, well, do I change it or not? No, they've already said it. So it's the same difference. It's just a matter of what the spec is. So I could find something in Costco specs that's just the opposite in a Target spec. Some of them require you to have so many people on the job site. Well, it may, because we're so good, we may only need 4 guys, and another contractor may need 6. But because the spec says 5 guys, we're going to have 5 guys there. And we sometimes they require a service guy the day after the conversion for all day, from opening to close. So as an example, the Costco, they open at 9, they close at 10. I have to have somebody there all day to check superheats, to leak check system operations. Whether it needs it or not, they still require you that in the specs. So again, as an estimator, if you're doing a conversion, that's very important. That's kind of why I put these specs in here, so you can kind of look at the two. And again, we got so many of these dang specs that everybody's different. I just didn't want to waste all that paper. It really is. You have to familiarize yourself with what the customer wants. And if you do enough of them, you know what they want. I mean, how many, again, we did 20 Walmarts and Sam's Club. You could go in there at the beginning of the week and you know what you were going to do because you'd already done it. You knew what the specs were. You didn't have to keep reading them. But if you jump over to a Target, I don't know how many, what have I got to do? So you have to familiarize yourself with what the customer's requests are. And if it's something extra or something they want, you need to make the representative aware that, hey, this wasn't in your specs, this will be an extra. Or this is going to be something that we have to charge you for, if you want us to do it. It's just like the condenser fan motors. We go in preliminarily and write stuff down that's bad. We get on a job site, they haven't changed the condenser motors. Well, hey, would you guys consider doing it? Yeah, we'll do it, but it'll be an extra. Oh yeah, we know that. But we'd rather you do it while you're on site because our guy can't get there. So you're going to run into those situations all the time. It's just depends on the customer. Okay, let's jump into Target stuff here real quick. I'll go over their specs just very quickly. I don't want to get too detailed. And this will be very, very quick, so stay with me. I should have brought my copy that I had highlighted, but here again, I'm going to, first page are telling you all of the references and everything, and what's staring me in the face right there on pre-conversion number C. Thoroughly leak check entire refrigeration system. Spec, thoroughly. Repair all leaks before proceeding with retrofit. So they're telling us to repair them. Right there, if there's a leak, it's our responsibility to repair them. Doesn't say it's an extra, but if it's a big enough issue where they've busted a line or something's come loose or the condenser's leaking, I'm going to bring it to their attention because that's kind of above and beyond the scope of work. So they want us to repair those leaks ahead of time. So Chris, is your leak checking Monday and you're making notes, or whomever's leak checking?
Oh, he's got the He already swapped that up.
Okay. So there you go. It kind of goes from start to finish. Install suction filters, dryers, oil filter, and separator filter. Day one. Now, farther back here, there is a chart. It's gray and white. When you get to it, we'll get to it in a little later. This is what their scope of work is. This is what they want you to do each and every day. It is right after the operations sheet. But they're telling you what they want you to do each day. Costco doesn't do that. Kroger doesn't do that. Meijer doesn't do that. So this is very helpful for the guys that's on site. They know what's ahead of them. And that's the one thing I do like about Targets, even when we're doing remodels or P-Freshers or whatever. They have milestones. That's what this sheet is. It's a milestone sheet. And it's telling you, okay, your milestone for the first day is, here you go. You got to get all this done. Now, see that little note at the far right? Refrigeration TRA. For Target, TRA means Target Refrigeration Authority. And what they do is they actually hire someone to come in and critique you or watch over your shoulder to make sure you're getting these milestones done. And if you've never had one looking over your shoulder the entire day, he's going to be watching. So that's why it's important they give you milestones, because they want you to hit these dates, these times, because it's pertinent to the job getting completed on time. So that's very useful. And I'm glad Target does that, because then it tells our guys what we got to do. So we're going to go back to the specs again, and we're just briefly going to go through them again. I can't beat on leak check enough. Verify cases and evaporators have liquid line dryers installed. So Chris, you and I talked about this earlier. That's one of the things you need to do out on site, because I couldn't do it at the time because I couldn't get up to take the panels off on the evaporators. So that's the only place that we have to add dryers. So, and they've got to be sweat dryers. So the materials that I'm sending out to you will be sweat dryers and hand valves. Because if it doesn't have a hand valve on it, and when I did look on top of the boxes, there were no hand valves whatsoever. So all your shut off, from what I could see, is back at the rack. So you'll go out on a job of this nature, you're going to be putting hand valves in and dryers. Let's see, verified cases and walk-in evaporators have liquid line shut-offs. Shut-off valves, if not provide and install for cases and evaporator coils. So there you go. That's why I've got those hand valves. They're telling us to provide them. The cases do, but the evaporators don't. There's your daily operation log. What they want you to do is list the parameter, or all the parameters that's on that. And that was that sheet prior to the milestones, operation daily log. The very last page of the specs we're on. It just tells you to list all of these set points, circuits at set point, liquid level, what it is, oil levels, alarms. Isolate refrigerant to avoid refrigerant loss during oil flush. So it's telling you what they want you to do. There's your oil test. Perform acid tests on removed lubricant. Report findings on acid test to Target Authority. Target Authority against the TRA, Target Refrigeration Authority. Now, when the job's completed, they make us send these in. Anybody seen these? These are kits that we have to mail in for oil analysis because they don't take our word, basically. So what they do is they make you take an oil sample, and it's in several different containers. So there's where the oil goes. You're going to put refrigerant oil sample, rack A, sample ID, oil type, date sampled, so on and so forth. Send it in real tight, put it in there, put it in there again. Then they already give you the form to send in. And then what that does, it goes to a laboratory that they do the analysis on, and you have to fill that sheet out. It's all curled up. I know you can't see it, but it's all curled here. But you're going to give your name and all of the pertinent information, what's going on, what kind of gas, location. They'll send it back to me or whomever is on the address, and they'll tell you that, hey, we're showing 15% mineral oil content. I don't care what your refractometer says, we're still showing 15%, and that's not what the owner wants to see.
How many times have you seen that?
Not very often. But again, it just depends on the circumstances of who's checking the oil and what they're doing to check the oil. So generally, I've never had one come back that it was failed. But they will tell you that what's in the oil. Like they'll say copper particles found in oil, or discoloration, or there might be, they may even find scant moisture in it. And let me get that sheet, I'll send it around to you, because what they do, they just let it go.
What's the turnaround time for that?
Usually on a good cycle, it's about 2 weeks. So you got to do that for every rack. So again, as an estimator, I got to put the cost of these in the job. And I don't want to say they're cheap, but they're a necessary evil because the customer wants it. I take a Kroger, they don't want that. Okay, so I keep beating a dead horse here, but it's because you have to be familiar with what your customer wants. Okay, I just happen to know that Target wants that. Costco wants that too. So here it's telling me on the oil, for example, for 404A system, minimum 1 oil change is required. But if I go to R22 system, a minimum of 3 oil changes are required. Tells you right there, black and white. They don't care about the first one or the second one. They want that third one.
What's R22 third?
The heat of compression ratio. If you're not setting, as an example, your expansion valves, if they're not set correctly, and you're running high superheat back, the pressure's fry. So you got to do everything you can to minimize that compression ratio, discharge, suction. So that's why you want to run your head pressure as low as you can, because the difference between a low head pressure and a high suction, and you have to add the, what is that, the 14.7 gauge. I mean, to do it correctly, that's how you figure your compression ratio. But the lower head pressure and the higher suction gives you a closer compression ratio. And on R22, if you're running typical 220, 230 discharge and it's a minus 30 system, you're going to be running it down around what, 5 pounds? Now do the math. 5 to 200 is what it's going to be. It's going to be 20 to 1. So you want that compression ratio closer.
So is that differential that creates the black deposits that are on the site?
Carbon. The heat of compression. So that's why you want to get that compression ratio lower. A lower discharge pressure does not create the carbon you see with a higher discharge. So it's just, and on low temp 22, that's why it's so difficult. If for those of you who have a pressure temperature chart, I know you all carry one, right? You're not working? I've used it so much it's all wore off here. Let's see. So if I'm running, this is an example, if I've got a R22 low temp and the suction saturated is going to be minus 30, that's going to be about 4.9 pounds. So I'm just doing this rough so you understand the compression ratio issue. So if I'm running the rack pressure at 5 pounds, okay, and on a typical discharge temperature on 22, that's going to be somewhere around 215, close enough, 215. So now take 5 into 220 or 215, and what is it one to the other? So I can take 5 into 200 how many times? 20, 40, okay? So if 5's 1, 40 to 1, that's going to kill you. So what you need in refrigeration is as high a suction pressure as you can maintain. If you can get by with what did I say, 5 pounds? If I can still maintain temperatures on that rack at 25 degrees, minus 25, and I'm 7, and I can lower my head pressure, which typically customers want that. They want that head pressure lower because it's energy, right? So if I can lower my head pressure to 180, now do the math. You've lowered that, or you've gotten that compression ratio closer. Closer is what you want. So if you can get even on R22 low temp, if you can get a 10 to 1, man, I'm happy. You ain't gonna get that black stuff. You're not gonna get that carbon. It's not gonna burn up. Absolutely. You go to any compressor manufacturer and they're gonna tell you that. Keep your head pressures down. Keep them down. Yes. Well, it's kind of a combination of several things. It depends on their stance with their customers. Sometimes it's, we want to be green. We want to protect the environment. We want to get rid of that old nasty HCFC because it's harmful to the atmosphere. We want to go to this new gas where the global warming is less. It could be this, because 22 is how much a pound now? About 11, 12 bucks a pound, 15. Okay, so if I have a catastrophic gas loss on my rack of 700 pounds, if it was 15 bucks a pound and I'm putting 700 pounds of gas back in it, but I can have 407, that's at $4 a pound, which would you rather? And a lot of the customers, that's what they're looking at, is they are looking at bottom line for their company. And your conversions typically, that's something I don't know for sure. They may be able to write off because it's just it's a conversion. They're doing something to their equipment. They're making it better.
Sometimes they just try to minimize their loss.
Yeah. And that's why you'll see a lot of these companies will go to a secondary. They'll go to the secondary or CO2. They'll go to glycol or CO2 because once again, now you had all of this refrigerant going out to the racks. Now it's probably about a third of that because the only thing you're using the refrigerant for now is to do what? To chill the transfer medium, which is the CO2 or the glycol. Right? Now that doesn't mean that the glycol is any cheaper, or you don't have to buy as much, or the electricity to run it isn't more. It's just the fact that your refrigerant footprint, your carbon footprint, is less. right? So that's one of the reasons for the I mean, there could be any number of reasons for conversions. They don't like the color of the tank for R22. I don't know. It's just different strokes, different folks. But the bottom line is, the government is, or the not just the government, but the governments are forcing the manufacturer's hands with the refrigerant. They're going to discontinue it, whether you like it or not. And we have to go to alternatives. So the customers see that, and they've got to do something about it, because just like with the old R12 and 502 and now 22, I don't want to get up to where I'm paying 35 bucks a pound. There's going to be a lot of R22 for a long time because there's so much of it. So it's going to be available, but they just can't make it. So you might be able to get it as a cleaned, redone gas. I mean, you could buy it that way, but again, it's up to the customer, and that's your bigger players are going at it right now, doing that. And then when they build the newer racks, they're going with that type of gas, or they're going to the secondary type coolants. So let's move on here. I said earlier about the oil filters. Change oil filters to Sporlan replaceable ROF style, compatible with POE. So that was this one that I showed you. So if this rack, which it does at Target, that we're going to be working on next week, it's got the OF 303T in it. So the spec's telling me, well, I got to change it. I got to go to this ROF, which we've done before. So I have to buy a whole new canister to accept this type filter. And it's going to be some time to put those new canisters in. You got to reconfigure the oil line and all of that. So there again, specs say I got to do that. So as you're estimating, you got to figure that in. Add the recommended oil. They're telling us what oil they want. No questions asked. They want this. Ensure POE oil is sealed. Notify them if it's not. Then they're telling you about how to evacuate. For mineral oil, a minimum of 3 oil changes are required. Again, they're beating a dead horse there. And they're telling you after third oil change, the concentration of MO is greater than 5%. Complete additional oil changes until they're below 5%. Use refractometer to determine the amount of MO retained. So, got to make sure you have one. Going back through here, here's the part I told you about the bags. For R22 systems, replace high pressure relief valves and rupture discs. Retained, replace parts and bags attached to valves for verification. Verify the relief valve and rupture disc pressure ratings match the receiver rating. And they're telling you right there, they specify 450. So the ones that's on the rack down there, I think were already 450. So it's like, why should I change them? They're already 450 because they want you to change them. Whether they're bad or not, same thing. Customers asking you to do it. They don't want to have to do it twice. They're going through it to do it once, so we put them in. Here's something we always have to look for at a Target, and I'm not beating Target, I'm just telling you this is something we always look for. They want you to pipe the receiver relief vent lines to the outside of the building, if not previously installed. Well, we're going to be doing that. We did it out at Avon, so we got to do it on this store. Just meaning that, okay, we've went through and we've replaced the relief valves. Now we've got to put fittings on them, pipe them together.
On top of the receiver right there, that rack part.
The very center, yes.
You're gonna run that up out of the road.
Right. So this, I don't know if you can see it here, guys. I'm going to use my little pointer. Right there. That's the relief valve. So they want us to pipe that. Now that's a flare fitting. The one on these relief valves that we're going to be putting in are pipe fittings. So it just depends, whatever it is, it's still got to be piped outdoors. So what we'll do is we'll run one line attached to both racks and take them out as one, because rarely are you going to have both racks blow. Rarely are you even going to have one blow, especially at 450 pounds. That's pretty high. So the refrigerant, and I should have brought a pressure temperature chart for this new gas. I haven't looked at it, but some of your gases, your normal condensing on them are high, like 410. 410's got a very high condensing, so or head pressure, I should say. So that may be, without looking at this new gas, I don't know right off the top of my head.
What is it they're going to use?
449A, blue. Remember blue?
Navy blue.
Yeah, here, the one that looks black. That's a pretty gloss blue. So, here's item P. For R22 systems, install new ball valve caps or rebuild ball valve gasket caps per manufacturer's recommendation. If a retrofit ball valve caps are not available based on the manufacturer, replace them. So fortunately, all the ball valves at this store are Superior and Mueller, so I'm able to get them. So we don't have to replace any ball valves, which is a good thing. Time consuming and costs money. Here's the item about the angle valves. 1/2-inch flare connection to receiver inlet and holdback valve for refrigerant recovery contractor, as I stated previous. Now this is something they've added this year. I've never seen this before, but they actually want us to put 1/4-inch service valves upstream and downstream of the holdback valves and the A9 valves, if it doesn't already have a tap to access. So as I'm looking at well, I had it out here earlier, there is a tap on the outlet side of that valve. So if I have to draw vacuum, and the purpose of that is for the vacuum, if there's nothing on the upstream side of the valve, then we have to weld these 1/4-inch lines in, or valves in. And again, it's for access and vacuum. Here's about the receiver float assembly gaskets. Retain them in bags again. Replace all Schrader caps and cores. Use brass caps with O-ring gaskets, which those were.
But Mr. Steve,
Yes.
say Kroger is like, nah, we don't want all the caps changed. Would you advise all caps, cores be changed?
Well, I would always advise that, simply because all the other chains do it. And number two, it's just while you're there doing it, it isn't that much to do that. But again, the customer is always right. If they tell you, Marsh is the same way. They didn't want, as I said before, they didn't want to do anything to the things that probably needed it more. They didn't want to do that. They want to roll the bones. So if Kroger doesn't want to put Schrader caps in, I mean, so be it. But you know, here again, you're all probably saying, well, how can that little Schrader, what did you do it? How can that little Schrader leak that much that cap can't hold it? So what do we do as a service guy? Well, we just put the channel locks on it, right? Just put the channel locks on the cap till it quits leaking. Come on, I've done it. I'll be the first to admit I've done it.
Depends on the time of day.
Yeah, well, it could be, but yeah, and leak lock. I mean, or you just get a 1/4-inch flare cap out, right? Just put a flare cap on it and you tighten her down. So again, I'm just saying, yes, over time that refrigerant and that oil will disintegrate that little gasket, that little rubber piece that seats off, which is on the side. And if you depress it, I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but there's a little rubber gasket down in there sometimes. This one doesn't have it. So the refrigerant and oil will evaporate, or it'll cause the gaskets. That's the reason for the gasket change. It causes them to shrink. They don't swell, they shrink. Because the refrigerant and the oil will take that gasket and it'll shrink it up. Just new. Yeah. because they don't want to take a chance of a used one, so they just say all Schraders, all caps. So, and Cody had some issues with some of the caps that we were getting in the beginning because they were too short or they weren't domed. It just depends on the fitting, but we've went to the dome type knurled and it's been working out pretty good. So,
Did you know they changed the design of that gasket on that cap? They put the hole in the center of it now.
well,
They-
there's some that weren't,
The
but
old ones used to have the solid gasket in them.
some of them did,
And
yeah.
then it would develop
Depress
that- depress the actual compressor, yeah.
Yeah, and that's,
The whole middle of the rubber.
yeah, it's just an O, really all that is in there is an O-ring. That's all it is.
Just to be nitpicky, like an OF 303T, you put a blue cap on that, or still the LED?
No, we still put a new cap on it, yeah. Yeah, because what comes from Sporlan is it's a plastic cap. Good point, John. That's a cheapo plastic, but you know those plastic caps have bailed me out a couple times. And guess what kind of gasket it's got? It's got an O-ring. So, yes, we changed those as well. All meaning all Schraders and all caps. And again, 2 reasons, because you need the new gasket or you need a new Schrader, but more so it tells me that the Schrader's been changed with the cap. Oop. Okay, moving on here. Just again, it's just on W, it's just telling you all replace O-rings, gaskets, external seals, over and over and over, same thing. So replace manual lift stems and Wolverine gasket with enclosing tube on solenoid valve. So it's not telling me I can just replace the gasket. It's telling me I have to replace that whole enclosing tube. No questions asked. Buy the enclosing tube, because enclosing tube's got that part, it's got the gasket, it's got the plunger, it's got the whole 9 yards. And they're telling you right there, buy it. That's what we want, that whole piece. Don't just change the gasket on me, don't cheat me. Okay, the next page, quickly. R22 systems replace modulode stem kit, not the whole valve plate. Anybody that's ever changed a modulode valve plate in here know how much they cost? They're close to $1,000 a pop. So now they've differentiated here, which is good, because that's a whole lot less. All you're replacing is just the top portion of the unloader. So back here on these Carlisles, I'm just going to use my finger. I don't know. You guys can see these unloaders up here. That unloader assembly up here. So if this was a Copeland, I wouldn't have to replace the valve plate or anything associated with it. I just have to change that unloader assembly. That's all, because it's got a wad underneath of it, a gasket. So they want you to change it. So the modulode stem kits, all they are is a metal gasket. It's a Wolverine gasket, but the inside of it's got an O-ring in it. That's why they want you to replace it. They don't want it to leak. Demand cooling solenoid coils or valves. So your low temp 22, again, why do they use demand cooling? Because heat, discharge temperature. Remember what we were talking about, compression ratio, and what it does? That heat has an ill effect on 22, and it fries the oil. So that's why you have demand cooling on our 22 low temp.
Not to keep the liquid pressure down.
No. So your demand cooling is typically only seen on low temp 22. So you're not going to see it on a medium temp. And if you do, it's because it's running lower than normal, or somebody's added it that they didn't need to. Let's see here, moving on. Remove and clean all compressor oil floor, oil separator, and oil reservoir sight glasses. I went on this earlier. While you're changing oil, it's a great time. You got to change the gaskets on the floats anyway, right? You got to take that plate off, right? The sight glass is right there. Have a rag, have some degreasing solvent, something to clean the sight glasses so you can see the oil. Because again, those sight glasses get filthy. So they're telling you right there, point taken, clean them. Now this is for when we do the evacuation of the rack. They want us to install a 1 1/8" connection point ball valve for evacuations. So they want you to have 3 points there that you're taking the evacuation on when you're ready to do the whole rack. And they're telling you where it's at, and they say a minimum of 1 1/8". So we've got a ball valve. We're going to connect a vacuum line from the liquid header, the suction header, and the discharge header. Somehow or another, we got to have all 3 of those lines in there. And fortunately, on Targets and sometimes Costco, they have spare circuits. So when that spare circuit's available, and especially if it's a hot gas spare circuit, you can pick up all 3 lines right there in one pop. Take it right back over to your vacuum pump, and it's a done deal. Otherwise, you got to find other access points that you can get into the discharge line. Now, they made a note earlier about, and I may be jumping ahead here, there's a, turn the page here on preparation. 3.2, number I, install 3/8 angle valves to bypass condenser drop leg check valves to allow condenser to be pulled in a vacuum. Remove angle valves or seal off angle valve connections after completing. So this is new. They want us to put those same type of angle valves like we had earlier. These are half. They want us to put 3/8 in on each side of the check valve for the evacuation. So if you've got a connection on the bottom, on the downside of the downstream side of the check valve, or even if you got one on the upstream side, you don't have to put them in. It's just there so that they can bypass that check valve, because if you're just pulling on the discharge line, it's going to suck that check valve closed, right? So that's why they want these in, so that you can bypass it. No, if it's going to be a permanent brass valve, they just said to seal off, and that means to cap it. So we'll put them all in with flares so that we can do that. And chances are what we'll do is we'll probably if we have to put those valves in, I'll get hoses that we can go from one to the other, or copper. We'll make a copper connector go from one to the other. So jump back again, sorry. I just when I saw that about the connection point for evacs. Replace demand cooling feed filters. As I said before, when we do our liquid line filter change, you will typically always have the same kind of canister on your demand cooling. On racks utilizing water heat, they want a lockout relay. Sometimes it's already there, sometimes it's not. During the course of the night, when we get ready to do the conversion prior, I'm going to have guys downstairs that are ready to tape up visqueen on the cases. So it says secure all visqueen products, tape and cardboard for open cases as necessary. RC to have dry ice ready for load in cases and walk-ins. Now, they shouldn't put walk-ins in there because they've never let us put dry ice in walk-ins. Why? That's right. What is CO2? Or I let the cat out of the bag. What is dry ice? Well, okay. They don't really want you to put it in the walk-ins, but if you do go in and put it in the walk-ins, then you have to tag it. You have to tag the cooler or the freezer that it's. Seen these before, Cody?
Not one for a freezer though, as far as dry ice.
Yeah. So what we'll do, we'll have a team of guys on the night of the conversion that's going to go around and put signs up like this. Do not open this door. Why? I got dry ice in it. Or it might be something, let's see if I got another one here. There were some for the cases. See, here's one for the freezer. Do not open this walk-in freezer. So if they're telling you to put it in there, we'll put it in. So you have to make sure that you've got enough dry ice to make that happen. So typically I know how much to order for each job just based upon how many systems. Here's a sign that we try to put in on the cases for the store personnel. We have to have that one panel where the expansion valve's at accessible. So looking at this case behind you, Eugene, the far left-hand side of that case is where the expansion valve's at. So we would most likely leave this right here. We would tape it or put it some here, leave this open so that we can access the valve. So we'll have some of these signs on the job that we'll put up on the targets. These just happen to have been from Costco. And while I got them out here, let me pass that around. These are the stencils we use if it's a 407A system. We'll actually put those up on the panels or on the receiver. Sometimes I'll cut that in half so that I can just put the R407A down on the receiver. And but this is a 68. If you'll notice that, that's a 68 oil, not a 32. So I'll have to find something for the 32. But let's talk a little bit about dry ice. I have a form back here on dry ice. It's quite a ways back. It's dry ice best practices. So let me know when you get to it. It just says dry ice best practices. Super Target stores during the refrigeration retrofit, they're telling you what time we're going to start, which is 6 p.m. Contractor behind the scenes, this is what he's going to do. So my lead guy or whoever is knowledgeable with the defrost or the Einstein, he's going to get in and he's going to bypass all the defrost circuits for that rack. That's why you need to record stuff as you get rid of them. Because if you don't remember, if you don't have a real good memory or you don't know what it's supposed to be, you're in trouble. So it's very important that you, when you're bypassing the defrost cycles, you record that information. Time of day, length. You do not want any system defrosting 3 hours before the shutdown. So the best thing is just to take those defrosts out for the night, unless it's got 4 or 5 defrosts per day. Drive the temperature down on all medium temperature systems except produce. So we're going to get into the controller and we're going to lower the temperature. It doesn't say how low, but because it's just for temporary, we're not going to freeze the product. Like let's take a excuse me, a dairy case. We can probably drop that down to 25 degrees without it doing any damage. But you take something like produce, like they're saying here, and you put it to 25, it'll freeze that leafy stuff real fast. So we're going to want to drive the temperature down on them, document all set point changes and overrides, drive temperatures down as far as possible on low temp. So what they're saying is if it's already a minus 20 or a minus 10, drive it down lower. Just drive it down to rack pressure. Just let it run. Always bring 5 extra set of gloves. They will get lost. Hand protection is a must. So I will most likely be providing thick leather gloves for the dry ice for whomever we put down on the floor. And that's even though the dry ice comes in we have it come in a bag. And it's real easy just to pick the bag up and put it on the shelf. But trust me when you hear me, dry ice is cold. It is very cold. And if you think you're Superman, go ahead and see how long you can hold it, because you're not going to do very good without getting burnt. Stage all insulated blankets, cardboard, styrofoam sheeting, etc. for easy access. Locate all breakers for case lights and anti-sweats on frozen doors. So again, same thing, we're gonna go in beforehand, shut the breakers off for the lights, the anti-sweats, to take all of the heat out of anything we can.
Whatever you do, don't go to a dry ice bomb cause. I've heard of somebody doing another conversion, right there.
Wait, what? What'd you say now?
Do not build a dry ice bomb. You get caught.
You wanna explain to everybody what a dry ice bomb
Take
is?
this, put a little bit of water in there, get some dry ice real small, and then all surface area. Put it in there, close it, count 30. It's louder than a shot. It'll throw this hundreds of feet.
And through somebody.
Don't get caught doing it.
Sounds like you're suggesting.
Because I would definitely say,
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta try it.
Yeah.
can't do it.
Go crazy, you're getting
It's fun to throw a piece of it in a pond that's got a fountain in it, though. You didn't hear me say that. Okay, medium temp cases, store temp to remove all fresh meat, chicken, fish from their cases. I wouldn't want to leave the fresh meat out in the cases anyway, because that's probably the most highest loss product you can get. So they've always been good about unloading meat cases, so I don't think that's an issue. Costco, I will tell you, they typically just unload the cases. They unload them all and put them in the POS boxes because they don't have the length of run of cases that a Target or a Walmart or a Meijer or somebody like that's got. They've got big POS boxes and their systems are what's called redundant. They've got like 4 coils in each of those POS boxes. 2 of them are run on rack A and 2 of them are run on rack B. So they can utilize that on both nights of the conversion without any true loss. And if you're driving the temperatures down anyway, it's minimal. So fresh meat is always, you got to make sure those are unloaded. All packaged produce will need to be pulled and stored in a cooler. Deli cases will have to have the product removed and stored in an appropriate cooler box. Bakery product, any medium temp bunker case will need to have product removed. So a lot of the stuff that you're looking at on medium temp, they're probably going to pull it anyway. They're going to pull it and they're going to put it in a cooler. So I'm back to that thing we talked about earlier about putting dry ice in a walk-in cooler. The downside of that is if they've shoved all that product in there already and you've already got dry ice in there, they're going to be gagging. So it's highly possible that we could maybe put the dry ice in there after they crammed it in there, because after that, once we get the rack started, they're not going to be putting their product out right away anyway. They're going to wait till all the temperatures come down. So at that point, the team that we have on the floor can go in there and remove the dry ice with the doors open and well ventilated. So I'm not going to force the guys to do it, but that's one way that we can assure that we keep the product cold. But right there in bold letters, what does it say? Dry ice will not be used in cooler boxes. But earlier they said in the walk-in coolers. Do not block airflow pattern with cases with plastic, cardboard, and blankets. Essentially meaning, I'm going to use this case right here. If I block this return air for whatever reason with plastic, if that whole bottom row is blocked off, where's my air going? It's going right outside the case. So they're essentially saying if you're going to cover these, which we will, we'll take visqueen from the top to the bottom and we'll cover those up with dry ice in them. But they're saying do not block off the bottom or any portion of the case. That's a no-no. Low temp bunker cases need to have product removed. Door cases will not need to be closed. Doors will be caution taped off, which we'll have a roll of caution tape. Walk-in freezers will stay closed. Dry ice not to be used in freezer boxes. I will have the dry ice show up the day of the conversion. simply because I'd like to get it there the day before, and that stuff doesn't melt because the containers that they send them in are the best containers. You could put a cold 6-pack in there if it's just iced up, and go back a week later and it's still cold. I don't know what they make those containers out of, but man, they are heavy duty insulated. So I would like to get the dry ice there like the day before, just so it's on site. But much like with many of our customers, their backroom space is very valuable to them, and they don't want to be tripping over 6-foot square box of dry ice that's in their back room. So they want you to order it so it shows up the day of the conversion, which I'll follow up on that probably the Friday or the Monday before. I'll call them and say, make sure I need a time that you're going to be on site with that dry ice, and hopefully the lead guy will receive it and we'll be ready to go. Case lights off, anti-sweat heaters off. The loading of dry ice in the cases will be completed by us. Monitoring the dry ice levels to replenish. Again, that's why we have a team of guys down on the floor to do that. That's all they're going to do is run. Put the visqueen up, put the dry ice down, block it off, make sure customers don't get in it. But at that point, the store's closed. With the Target, they'll close at 10 o'clock. We're starting the conversion process at 9:30. Pump down, all of that. So they have little time to get in there and start putting that dry ice in. So that's why you have to have a team of 3 or 4 guys. So they'll run around with their dry ice and they'll put it. And I've already got a calculation I use of how many blocks that I put in each case, so that I know that they're getting, like for a 12-foot dairy case, I'm going to have them put 6 blocks. On a door frozen food, I'm going to probably put 6 to 8 blocks, just so that it stays cold. It's very important. The dry ice is cheap enough, we don't need lost product. So I'd rather put more in than not enough, because it will melt over time, just because of the, what is that called, sublimation, where the air passes over the ice and it just melts. And then what happens, you'll notice with a block of dry ice, if you leave it long enough, when it's done, it's just powder. It's almost a powder when it's done. But fortunately, when we buy that dry ice, it comes in plastic bags, and I was going to this earlier. You're not really ever going to be in contact with it, especially if you've got thick gloves, because what I've done with it is I'll grab the bag and I'll throw it up on the shelf. It'll be tie wrapped up that you can grab that portion of it. You don't even ever have to touch the dry ice. You can pick it up and throw it right on that shelf. And we are in communication the day before with the store or the customer and tell them, well, we're going to put dry ice here. Can you move the product over a little bit so that we can put it in there? So again, all of this is based upon communication. We have to keep in touch with the owner or the customer, so that they're helping us. They're not working against us. Very important. And then, of all things, they're requiring the visqueen be a certain thickness. 6. And you know what? We had it over here in the HVAC shop. They've got pallets of it. So we were fortunate we didn't have to go out and buy some. Last page about safety, it's just telling you how cold it is. Believe me, it's cold. Don't ever handle it with bare hands. If you start got breathing problems, get away from it for whatever reason, should you be breathing it. Here again, this is what I don't get. When entering freezers or coolers with dry ice already in place, leave the door open. But then they beat on us 2 or 3 times and said no dry ice in coolers or freezers. So not really sure what that's all about. Use a buddy system inside and outside the cooler. Protective clothing. Store the dry ice in an insulated container. Thicker the insulation, the shorter dry ice. There it is, sublimate. Never store dry ice in an airtight container, right, Cody?
And airtight, yeah. I do
Yeah.
all the time.
Well, that was your ice bomb you were talking about. And just make sure that the dry ice is in a ventilated area. So let's go back here just quickly on a few more target specs, and I got a couple more things to say, and we'll be pretty close to question and answers. Now, this is something new too this year. They want us to use 2 recovery pumps at a rate of 1.5 pounds of vapor recovery. So that's going to go back to the recovery guys. Rapid Recovery's got to have enough recovery pumps to pull that out. So they can't just do it with one. They have to provide at least one and a redundant, so that if one fails, I guess they've got the other one on hand. Remove and install check valve components during vacuum and recharging, which is kind of they're going against themselves again, where they told us to put the brass valves in, but here they're telling us to take the check valve components should have been taken out. I don't quite understand why, but why I'd want to break into that after I've pulled a vacuum on it is beyond me. If I've pulled a vacuum on the system and I've got the check valves, they want to put the components in it. Why would I want to break that vacuum to put these in? I wouldn't. So we're going to go with the 3/8 valves like they asked. And using a minimum of 17 to 24 CFM belt drive pump with, there's that 1 1/8 connection we talked about previous. Pull vacuum on suction header, liquid header, and discharge side of the system as per section 29. Pull vacuum to target's minimum 1,000 microns. Target personnel and RC to make final determination based upon achievable vacuum without impacting product. So what they're saying is, if you haven't got quite down to that 1,000 micron level and you've been 4 hours and you only get 4 hours, then the TRA and yourself will make that determination as to if the vacuum you pulled is good. So I will tell you, pulling a vacuum on a system that already has oil in it, which is what you're going to have, because I don't care how many times you change the oil, it's 5%, there's still oil out in the system. And the vacuum pumps has the worst chance of making that obtainable because there's oil in the traps. So you're trying to boil all of that oil out of those traps. It's tough to do. And generally we try to get it down to 500 microns if possible, but it's not going to happen. That's why they went to 1,000. And they generally, as long as you get it down to that 1,000 and it holds, they usually give you 15 minutes because they want to get the rack pulled. I mean, you'll know immediately if you don't have your vacuum attained, because first of all, it's not going to pull down. I mean, that's your first key, is it's not going to pull down. And if it's not pulling down within the first 15-20 minutes of your evacuation, you got a leak.
Never seen it go below 15 inches if there's even just one Schrader ounce. I've never seen it drop below 15 inches. So once I knew I hit 15 inches, I knew ready to seal. People could use the bathroom, smoke a cigarette, until in here, my stay one spot. Don't move. When it's 15, you guys will scatter and everybody can check everything.
Once again, another reason for having the team down on the floor is they can be checking stuff for you during the course of the conversion, because that team of 3 or 4 down on the floor and the 4 or 5 you're going to have in the motor room on the conversion, you don't need all those people up in the rack room. They'll be bumping into each other. And we talked earlier about everybody's got an assigned job when they go in on these conversions. John, you're going to do the receiver gaskets. Kevin, you're going to do the A9 valves. Cody, you're going to do the sort valves. Everybody's got something to do, so we can all come together at one time and it doesn't get missed. So very important. Can't tell you how good that is to have, and then that way when you're done you check it off and you go pick up something else. Once you got the vacuum down, add initial charge to liquid to the high side while system is in 1,000 micron or lower vacuum. Always charge through the liquid line dryer. So that's why I got, what did I do with it here? That's why I got this puppy. I always buy flare dryers so that we can use them when we put the new gas in. They're telling you right there in the spec, you got to use a dryer when you put the new gas. I could probably go with a smaller dryer, but these are very common and I usually can get 2 or 3 uses out of them, providing you cap them after you're done. A lot of times, like the next day you go in where the guys didn't curl their hose up, that's open to the atmosphere, you might as well throw it away. So I've always got usually 3 or 4, maybe half dozen of these on site, because we'll have 2 tanks going at one time, sometimes 3, to dump all that gas in at the beginning of the start. So I'll have the tanks downstairs and we'll run our hoses upstairs in the motor room right into that liquid line. Start the system. We want to make them at 40%. Superheats, we'll be checking that throughout the whole time. Operation guidelines again. Then we're on that thing about relabeling all components. So the stencil I sent around, that's what we'll use. Right there, repaint compressor heads and stencil receiver match to ASHRAE color code. I took forever to get that color, trying to find out what that color was for 449. Nobody knew what it was because it was too new. I even, well, there is an A, but no, there's not a B. It's just A. I'm just telling you what I sent out. You got a 448 and a 449, but they're both A's. Now, if they got a B, I don't know. Long and the short of it is, Hill Phoenix had actually sent me a picture that showed the colors. I couldn't get the information from the manufacturer, but Hill Phoenix already knew it and sent me a picture. So, and I think that's actually in here. Yeah, on your gas conversion cheat sheet, which is what we're going to next, quickly. It's just showing you an example of the retrofit ball valve cap. There's all the bags on the EPRs and whatnot on solenoids. There's that suction liquid and hot gas lines that they tied all together, which this store's got that. So it doesn't on the medium temp, but it does on the low. There's that angle valve I talked about earlier that we got to weld in on the liquid line. Just got one of these new digital micron gauges. I had one of my own, but we got one of these now to use. You can see how the racks got stenciled on the heads, on the electrical, and you can't see it, but it's also stenciled down on the receiver. We'll also be required to put a new sheet up, and the next page shows you the colors. 448A and 449A, 2 different colors. 448's a sail blue, and 449 is, you can't hardly see it, it's navy blue. There's your tracking. Get on down the line, we're doing the where you've got to write the condition of all of the fans, the condensers, the racks are at gas levels where they want, tighten connections, final reading, cell floor conditions, so on and so forth. Many items to go through and check. Then there's another one for your racks that you got to fill in the information on what the temperatures and pressures are. Then they have to sign it and move on. So the only thing I didn't cover in the target information was what they're looking for in the milestones, and you guys can read that on your own because this tells you what you have to do day by day. We kind of touched on most of it through all of this. So let me see what I've left out here. Looking for my notepad. There it is. Leak detectors we touched the base on, but we will have the back rack on site, providing providing that we can get it programmed for the new refrigerant. But to start off with, it's already programmed for R22, which almost every leak detector is. So we shouldn't have any trouble, but in the meantime, I'm going to find out, and it's probably just a download, as you said. We'll probably just have to download it on a USB cable, but they can program in whatever parameters for the new gas, and we'll have it in there. That's the joy of these back racks, is you can do that. And plus, they pick up a fart and a whirlwind. If anybody's ever used one of these, you know exactly that's the truth. They pick it up. They don't miss it. Whereas like your D-Techs and your H10s and those, they're somewhat delayed and they don't pick it up. This picks it up per million. I mean, you can program it for what you want, which is another good thing, but it certainly does the job that we want it to do. So we'll have one of these on any of my conversions. And I will tell you that Kroger demands it. They will not accept anything other than a back rack. So I haven't seen that in Target specs yet, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to go to it. So Kroger does. It's in their specs. And the good old oil bucket. We will recover the oil out of those compressors, out of the systems, and I will always have oil buckets so that you can drain those compressors, because it's not very good on the floor. So just for you. So the oil will come back here. We do a recycle here at the shop. It's over towards the transportation area. So I'll typically have, I don't know, 8 to 10 of those buckets for our conversions.
It took us a couple explosions to figure out we got to drill a real small hole right in the middle of the top alley.
Because the oil has what in it?
Refrigerant. Let it sit out for a day.
Yeah.
As soon as you put it in the car, man, it starts moving.
Put a blue lid on it.
It'll blow up.
Yeah, it'll pop off. Especially if it's in the sun. If it's in a cool room or something, it's not likely. So.
Always drill a little tiny hole.
Recovery tanks, that's something else. On this particular target that we're doing, Kroger, it's the same way. They provide the recovery tanks, which are back here. And some, I didn't bring any 1,000-pounders over because I'm not sure I've seen any, but most of the recovery tanks will be of this size, 100-pounders, and they will already be on site, skidded, and we'll actually move those over for rapid recovery when they get ready to get the gas. So we'll have these on site. We're responsible for, like I told before, for getting that gas back, but they'll use these particular type tanks. I'm not a fan of the 50-pounders that Kroger supplies, because when the gas goes back to the manufacturer or whoever gets it, they want it in these. So we have to spend additional time to transfer that gas into these after it's already been put in those. And rapid recovery, or maybe it's the other way around, because rapid recovery puts them in these, and then we have to transfer them to the 50-pounders, because that's what Kroger provides. So different strokes, different folks again. And let's see, what else have I? We've got some here at the shop that we use if we have to provide them, or we can buy them from United or other vendors. Typically what we'll do with them is we'll pull vacuum on them. We'll just make a header of sort and pull vacuum on 3 or 4 or 6 of them at one time, and make sure they're in a good vacuum when we send them out.
Also, 449.
Yes, sir.
Since it has 25.7%.
R134A. I knew you were going to ask that. Why would they be using it?
It's not why, no, I'm saying the leak detector may be able to pick it up even though you're not really on for
That's true.
because of the different blend that it has.
Look at you. What? You're clever. Real clever.
I am clever.
If he does say so himself.
We may be able to set it on something else
Yeah.
similar.
Well, I think even then, and that may be what their programming will be when they redo it, they're going to say, well, hell, it's already got 134A. We can still use that code or that whatever it is and just say it's 449A. I'm not really sure how they set that up in the back rack, but that's a great point. And I thought you were going to go somewhere different with that. Why would they be putting 449 in if it's got 134A in it and they're going to be getting rid of 134A? That's my question. So,
I can't believe there's no R12.
yeah. Not yet, anyway. And then the third week of the job generally is just clean up, superheats, making sure everything's right, leak checking, checking pressures, leak checking.
Yeah, that guy with that leak detector is really gonna be rough.
Well, what I require on any of the third week installs is you do your leak check in the morning when you get there, and you do one before you leave. And it doesn't hurt to do one during the day. Because again, with this being a new gas and a new oil, and you've went to the extreme of changing all of the gaskets, believe it or not, something's gonna leak. It always does. Have you ever had one that's been perfectly tight? Never.
The next day and little joints blow, or valves that are not replacing, dripping liquid will be a big old ball of ice. From one day to the next. Shit.
Okay, like I said, the last week it's just you're recovering the gas and that you picked up and sending it off. If there's gas left over, again, almost all of them supply their own gas, or the people you're working for supply the gas. So you're not always going to put all of it in there. It's just like with the POEOL. Seems like they always send, way more than you're ever going to use. But you have to record it, and it has to go back, label it, get it back. So that's part of it. Okay, I think I've hit about everything I can hit. Anybody got any questions that we haven't already asked? So what time we got? Is it quarter till yet? Okay, why don't we gather ourselves and go to the back of this rack quickly, and we'll look at some of these valves as they are in place, and you can get a better understanding for what we do. Okay, let's start off with these ball valve caps. It looks like it's that one. With this being a Mueller, this is the replacement cap, and what I like about them, I told you how many gaskets they got on them, so you can see why. 2 O-rings, a nylon, and then you've got the Teflon inside as well. So these things really seal off, so there's no reason to have to change the ball valve. So if you look at what you're taking off, this is all that is, that's all it's sealing it right now, is that Teflon gasket. So now you're putting these on, there's literally the minutest chance of it leaking. So they, yeah, that'll push down so that that flat will go right on that ball valve. And then when you start threading it on, it'll find it.
First time you put a crescent wrench on one of those versus the others, you'll realize you're on the Cadillac valve.
So
They definitely work smoother.
So that stem obviously is going to operate your ball valve, and the rest is pretty much history. You tighten it down with a crescent.
Out of the valves and the leaks.
Yeah, these are obviously the way to go with them. No.
So how come they didn't put them on there in the first place?
Well, because these were all probably made prior to, they don't know what kind of gas you're going to use. So they may already be a POE oil. You may already put 404 in this, or an HFC gas that's already got POE in the oil or in the system. So that's why they started making the retrofit caps. Was, hey, it's beneficial to them because that's a $20 item versus a $150 item. So if I can go through and just change the caps, I've saved the ball valve cost and the labor and the downtime, right? So that's your ball valve caps. Let's see what else we got on here. Here's one of those A8 valves we talked about earlier on the suction side. And I can't tell, we haven't had enough runtime on them for them to get rusty, but remember me talking about the bolts rusting? Prime example where they put one on the side, and that bolt that's on that holds that assembly down, it threads itself down into that cap. It's gonna rust.
I don't want to be the guy that has to rebuild that valve.
That's what I was saying, how do you get to it?
Well, probably from the other side. I'm just guessing, or you're gonna have to stand on your head. Just something like a blaster, that blast.
Coca-Cola, yeah, it's actually a good.
Is it? Yeah. So,
I drink too much of it.
so you know, I typically it's either going to be like a WD-40 or a blaster type stuff, something to, yeah, thread loose stuff. So, but I'll go through on the first day, and if I've got any of those that are apparent on the rack that I've got to break open and get to, I'll soak them down. And you can see those threads come all the way through the bottom of it. So get the top and the bottom, so that it can go through, penetrate at both sides. Suction filters, that's those canisters that were in the purple cans. That's where you're going to change those. See what else have we got down here. Let's go down here to the end of the rack. We'll look at the oil filters and all of the big valves. What we've got back in here, here's this oil filter that I was talking about before. It's the ROF style had the filter in the yellow can. So currently the target that we're going to be doing has got the OF 303. So we've got to reconfigure the oil line to accept one of these. So it's going to be a little work in progress to do that. And we'll have to take the system down for just a short period to pick up the inlet and outlet and still make it work. So that's your oil filter for the system. This particular oil separator is a non-serviceable, no float in it, so that means this is a high pressure oil system, but it's got sight glasses. So if I'm doing a retrofit on this, I've got to thread those sight glasses out, and depending on what type it is, I can go to that manufacturer and find out what that sight glass has got, if it's a O-ring or if it's a knife edge or what it is. But if it's an O-ring, then I'll have to pop that out and change those gaskets. Be similar to what you have on the oil floats that we looked at before.
Is that when you're talking about then, that's when you wipe them off also?
Yeah, while you got them apart, you're gonna clean them out. You're gonna wipe.
Are you planning to put some kind of a ball valve on either side of the canister when you install it so that it can be changed in the future without having to do?
Well, the way that this oil separator is set up, I'm not going to go to the expense of putting a ball valve just before and just after. I'm going to use whatever ball valves and line valves that's in there currently to isolate it. So I probably won't, but that doesn't mean that you can't if you feel like you're going to have to make multiple repairs on it.
Didn't you say you have to take the whole rack down to do it?
Just temporarily though, just for those sight glasses.
Oh, okay, for the sight glasses.
And see, that's something you can do. You can do that the night of the conversion, because that's going to take no time to pop those those sight glasses out of there. I mean, that literally, to pop those sight glasses out, it's going to probably take you 5 minutes. Put a new O-ring on it, thread them back in. Remember the heat reclaim valves that I was talking about earlier with the 4 bolts? Well, we've actually got one of each on this rack, so this is going to be fun when we do the retrofit on this rack. The heat reclaim valve is a solid casing, which is the newer style, with just the one slip nut at the top. And let me get over here. So you got the one slip nut, but it's a solid valve. So that is literally non-serviceable, isn't it? I can't change any guts in that, just the gaskets. Whereas on this one, this is the split condenser valve. It's one of those 4-bolt ones we were talking about, so I can service that. If this one takes a bite, we've got to replace the whole valve for whatever reason. If the system's that dirty and it starts jamming the cage assembly up in there, we have no choice other than change the valve. With this, at least we can take it apart, providing we put the guts back in the right way. We can do that, but this will have that gasket kit that we talked about. You can go on and find the kit for it. Liquid line solenoids, this is solenoids that we got on the subcooler, and you can tell that doesn't have a manual stem on it, so it's just going to be just the enclosing tube and the Wolverine gasket that we're going to have to change is all on that. Likewise on all of our ball valves, fortunately these are all Mueller, so we'll be able to just put those retrofit caps on. And let's see, what else am I missing? Down here's a liquid filter for the subcooler. So we would want to change that as well during the course of the retrofit. Okay, I think I've hit all the big ones here. Let's come back around the front. Okay, we can see a little bit better in here for winter controls. When we put the rack together, we made sure that it was on a split condenser so that we can actually see what it does in split. So we've got a pump out solenoid here underneath of here so that when it does go in split, it can pump out that side of the condenser. And if you look at that solenoid, it's a non-serviceable. So it's not bound to leak should we have a retrofit, but if in fact it does fail, then it will never pump out that side of the condenser should you have a failure. So that's our pump out solenoid that we, in this case, we won't have to change, but if it's got a manual stem or a bonnet on the top of it that is serviceable, we would have to change those guts. Up here at the very top is our A9 and our A82 valve. Actually, that's an A81. So you can actually access those for your retrofit with the cage assembly, by the O-ring kit that we talked about. So both of those are accessible where you can get them. But if you'll notice, based upon target specs, we don't have an inlet valve that we can access. So we do on the outlet side, but not on the inlet. So we would have to weld one of those 1/4-inch valves in there. Same thing on the A82. There's not one on the outlet side, but there is on the inlet side. It's just the opposite. So those are, you got to look them over and know what you got to do as far as the valves.
Looking at those blue things, right?
Yeah.
All right.
These two valves up here. This is the A9 and the other one's the A81. Okay, quickly on the oil floats, this is same stuff. Here's where you got the flange into the compressor and the sight glass out here. So when we drain the oil on this Carlisle, it's going to be down here. Likewise, since we don't have any Copelands here, the Copelands are going to be down low as well. But there's no screen that we can access on the Carlisles. And when you're taking them down, you're going to clean the sight glasses, and then should you have one on the compressor like this, you got to pull them off and clean them, which means another what? Gasket. So that's why they're cheap. They're cheap enough that you buy enough of them, so if you got a situation, you've got plenty of them. But the guy that's going in doing all the estimating should be taking that into consideration. Then on your Centronics, on your Copelands, and this particular, I don't know what they're using here, Delta P?
Delta P,
Yep.
-2.
Okay, so these have got O-rings in them as well, just like the Centronics. The Centronic, just like this one's got a brass gasket that it's just a brass ring gasket. I've never seen those leak, but we don't take a chance with them. We go ahead and change the brass gasket. And then down inside of the assembly, when you pull that sensor out of there, there's an O-ring on the bottom of it. And we're required to change those as well. And they're very tiny. They're not very big as your little finger. So those are down in there that you've got to replace those.
Steve,
Yes.
question. The filter you were talking about using the greaser to clean, is it in at the bottom?
Yeah.
So once you take
Well,
that,
you don't want to put. You can use it to clean your sight glasses.
okay.
Yes.
And then where's the filter at?
There isn't one on this. On a Carlisle, there's not. On a Copeland,
So big nut.
it's depending on the model of the compressor. It's either a nut or it's a diamond-shaped plate that you'll take out with a spring behind it. Good question. And then we already talked about the unloader earlier. Talked about the unloader gasket with a Copeland. It's a modulode. This is just a brass header that you'll have to get a new gasket for. And I believe that's about it on the rack. Oh, up here, we got to get this. This is that gasket we talked about on the receivers. There's a O-ring gasket behind this, so when the system's completely out of refrigerant, when you've recovered it, you'll pop those 4 bolts off. It'll come right out. It's got a float that's that is on a gear that'll raise or lower based upon how much liquid is in there. But you've got to pull that whole assembly out to get the gasket, because the gasket has to go over the float. So that'll pull completely out. You'll put the gasket in and put the float back together. And we talked about earlier on the relief valve, it's the same way. This has only got one relief valve on it, but a lot of these big racks will have a tree valve with 2 relief valves. And in this case, this has only got one. So you'll have to change that when the gas is off of the rack up here. And these are rotor lock fittings on the valves. They generally will not ever have to be changed because they're Teflon. You generally never have to change the Teflon gaskets.
I thought I saw in the book it said on the rotor lock you did have to change the gasket
In which
on the compressor.
company?
I didn't
See?
notice. I just remember seeing it, so I was just wondering if
And it, again, we're customer geared what they want.
I think it was.
We don't have any rotor locks on these, but Copeland's are synonymous on their discharge line to have a rotor lock with a Teflon gasket.
I know Walmart wanted us to change all the rotor lock gaskets and on to figure out we can't break that or lose them, it's so rusted. So they just started having us replace all the parts on Walmart.
Yeah. And again, we're back to the same thing. It's whatever customer specs are.
You don't feel they necessarily would need change
I-
because of the material?
If you're asking me personally, I say no.
I
Because,
value your information.
well, I appreciate that.
You're very
So,
knowledgeable guy.
typically, what do you want?
What's your leak detector?
He ain't getting it. He probably wants my core remover.
Tractometer?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He wants the
there
core
you go.
remover too.
I would like to have that.
Okay. I don't know that we need to go to the condenser. There's nothing up there that really has any connections on it, short of the line sets and ball valves. We would have to change the caps on the ball valves here. So now if the condensers had an access valve on them, like a purge valve or something, we would have to change those caps. And Schrader caps and Schraders. So that's really, that would be the only thing we would have up on the condensers, and I don't want to drag ourselves all the way up there to look at that. So, okay, anyone have questions that I can answer that I haven't already? Nothing?
I have a bunch of them to start getting into it, you know?
Yep. Well, and I go back to what I said earlier. For somebody going in just saying, oh yeah, you're going to retrofit this rack and you're going to put new gas in, but they have no idea how many gaskets and how many parts and all of the things you have to have ahead of time so that when you get to the store you can hit the ground running. It's very important that you do your homework previous to starting one. So, because once you're knee deep into it, and I forgot this valve.
Yeah. Too late now.
Well, I got the system down, now what do I do? So that's why it's critical for you, if you're going to do an estimation on one, or you're just going to be doing one, that you have all your pieces and parts in line. And what I try to do on my conversions, I actually take the boxes of the parts and I actually label what they're going to be. So I'm going to label my A9 valve, I'm going to have parts kit A9.
You know how John is, he'll leave some shit out.
Well,
Oh, believe me, he was there yesterday.
I've already hammered him yesterday,
Yeah,
so.
there you go.
None of those fittings dented. No copper dented.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's very critical early in the get-go that you get everything organized. Now, that's not to say that when you get there you find something's wrong, but that's why I double check all the parts before they go out. Because I'm the guy that estimates it, I'm the guy that orders it, and I'm usually also the guy that's out there working in it.
Yelling
Usually.
at everybody else.
That's right, because I can.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Nothing else. I appreciate you coming by, and hope you got something out of it, because we are DEEM and we do lots of refrigeration conversions.